Okay, let's look at chapter 2.1, drawing. All right, so first, this is the chapter that begins part 2. I want to explain to you just a few vocabulary words that are actually going to be relatable to all the chapters, and that's medium, and in plural meaning media. And then definition reads, the material on or from which an artist chooses to make a work of art. For example, canvas, oil painting, marble, engraving, color pencil, pastel, or clay. The images that you see, I hope to kind of like reiterate that for you. You can see where an artist is drawing on paper, and then they're painting on canvas, or they're working with wet clay in their hands, or they have ink and they're rolling it onto a linoleum block, or they're using thread and different fabrics to quilt, or just wood carving. So all of these are types of media, and each discipline has its own set of media. So for drawing and painting, and in some ways I guess you could say printmaking too, and maybe even photography, but really we'll just look at it in terms of drawing and for painting. You will have a binder. A binder is kind of like a glue. It adheres pigments to a surface. There are a lot of different binders out there. Most of them derived from nature, but there's beeswax, which is right over here. And this is refined beeswax. When it's first collected, it's rather a yellow color, but they filter and clean it to make it clear so it doesn't interfere with the quality of pigment. Egg yolk, vegetable oils, like over here you can see there's linseed oil or safflower oil. Gums, like gum arabic, which is a gum that is coming from like the sap of a tree. And then water, and then polymers, which is right over here. This is called matte gel that artists would mix in with their paint. So where do pigments come from? A lot of them come from nature as well. You can see there's so many different beautiful color rocks, grinding those up using that powder as pigment. You could also use burnt wood, or just different types of like organic, like plants. On the far right is a spice market. I'm assuming probably from India or near the Middle East, but all of the rich colors you see are actually derived from, it's a spice, like it's edible, right there in the center. And you could actually take water and a brush and you could draw with it. Or you could take, if you're not using water, you could use like a wax or one of these oils and make a drawing material for it. Okay, ground. This is whatever surface the artist is working on top of. You can have grounds like on canvas. You see someone gessoing. Ground on wood panels. Wood panels are real popular for artists to draw on and paint. In the bottom left, this is where the artist is preparing the panel with rabbit skin glue. Canvas, there's different vellums, which are kind of, you can see through those. There's papers that have cotton woven into them, and some of them have more cotton than others, so some are more absorbent than others. But they're pressed, the fibers are pressed with hot water for smooth, or for texture with the cold. Okay, so the purpose of drawing, at first let's look at a sketch. That's an idea of like almost if you had to do an essay, you wanted to do some brainstorming, you would just write out some bullet points of what you want it to be about. So in this case, the artist sketches their ideas, and it helps them prepare for the later work. In this case, we see one from Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, and you can see the finished painting there on the right. Cross-hatching, this is a technique where the artist will overlap lines. In this first example, it's simply hatching, and there's no overlapping the lines. They just run parallel. Well, the more you overlap, or the thicker the line, or just the closer they are to each other, the darker the value. So if you look at this still life, you can see that there's a variety of cross-hatching, about just extreme dark, medium to light. Okay, gesture drawing is another technique where usually it's of a figure or person, but it doesn't have to be. But the idea is that you identify, I'm just going to read this to you, identify and react to the main visual and expressive characteristics of a form. Since artists often confront changing subjects, meaning like people move on us or animals move on us, in situations, what the artist is looking is to capture the energy of the moment, and that's what is essential. And so I think there's different interpretations. I don't want you to think all gesture drawings look the same. So if you look on the right side, one has stronger, kind of sketchy series of lines, and one has loose, broad lines. And that's a lot of it due to the material they're doing their gesture drawing with. Another technique is called contour drawing. Contour drawings do not have value. Those are a different category altogether. So when we say contour, that's referring to just like an outline. And when we say outline, it doesn't mean that you can't describe, like you could see the lines on her dress. You can see her, the hairlines. You can say here's the daughter's face, and this is the back of the mother's head, and there's her back. You still can describe what's going on inside that outer outline. You just, again, don't put value into it. It's just strictly a line-based drawing. Okay, so now we're going to take a few minutes to look at different types of drawing media. Graphite, which is probably most familiar to you all, it actually comes from a rock. It's considerably lighter than a lead, and it started becoming a common drawing material and used in a pencil form after the 1500s. Some pencils, like if you'll look at a set, have a B, and B means that the graphite is darker, it's softer. It can go to an H, which is not, you don't see an example of that here, but H is so hard, really artists don't tend to do a final drawing with it. It's more used to do studies or sketches, like we were talking about a few slides back. And that's because it's easier to erase. And so I would imagine for the deer that they used a series of like HB on up to maybe 6B to create it. This is a self-portrait by an artist who used different types of pencils. We've got anything, I would guess, as hard as an H all the way up to probably a 6B. But a lot of different types of lines. They're just very loose though. And I guess I could say squiggly, but she is trying to, basically with this portrait, she's trying to record herself following the Holocaust. So it's not a very happy piece, but she's seeing herself as a survival. Another dry drawing media is color pencil. Prismacolors are known to be the best quality of color pencils. They're considerably, the colors are just so much more rich. They're easier to blend. As you can see over here on the right, I believe that's some Prismacolor, and it's an amazing detail. And then I liked this one over, they took an old stamp and they took the colors from that stamp and just continued that landscape past what was actually issued in the image on the stamp. So this is Piece of Cake, and the artist drew all of this in color pencil, and it's just incredible the amount of realism that one can have. And as you might imagine, this was drawn during the 80s. So, okay, charcoal is another dry drawing media. It's very loose compared to the others that we were just talking about. It could, you put it in your hand and it could crumble if you made a fist. It's been used since prehistoric times. It smudges very easily. It's desired by artists who want to have more of a solid looking image as opposed to a linear or contour based image. Charcoal is made from burnt wood that's being compressed with the wax as binding agent. This artist is just doing, basically this is a study, so this wasn't meant to be like a final piece, but you can see she starts to do a little bit more detail in her hand and her face, but I guess she's showing the action of her arm kind of moving around by keeping it so loose. Chalk, or what I always call it, is soft pastels. It is in this category that your book has. It's chalk, crayon, and pastel. So pastels is made from a powdered calcium carbonate, which is mixed with gum arabic, which is that sap from a tree. So it is really just like the charcoal. It's really soft. You could take one of those sticks in your hand and it would just crumble if you made a fist. I think you can see that softness and the textures on her face. Pastels work really well on their ground being a pastel paper, which are usually earth tones or blues. Most artists that are professional rarely use it on white. Over here you can see someone is experimenting with pastels. I should also say chalk interchangeably, I guess, but this blending is such a smooth transition. However, if you don't like having powder on your hands, then this may not be the drawing tool for you. Here's Degas, the tub, and I just look at this and I mean, if someone had not said it was a pastel drawing, I could have easily thought it was a painting. But anyway, you could see there's some really nice blends, but at some points he still leaves the lines very visible. You can only really layer so much. At least that's my personal experience. And I think that once you are a seasoned drawer in this medium, you discover, like, maybe if you want to have a strong line at the end, it needs to contrast either by value or color, like in her hair. The hair has really defined lines, but it's really bright on top of probably what used to be dark, like you see at the front of her head. Okay, so oil pastels have pigment as well, but they have an oil wax binder. And this is a painting by Monet. I say painting, it's an oil pastel drawing that it does look like one of his paintings. It doesn't blend as smooth. I think that's kind of visible right here in this drawing. You kind of have to press down hard and just do these strokes and just kind of layer it. It's very like a creamy consistency, not like chalk that breaks into a powder form. Ink is your wet drawing media. You can use brush, you can use an ink pen. There's so many different types of ink pens out there, and there's different types of ink. Early ink, which was a carbon ink, like it says, is mixed with soot and water and gum, and it was very permanent, precise, and had rich, dark color. Later, we see more of a contemporary ink, which is the one I'm familiar with. It's an India ink, and I could get it in black or like a brown, and it is carbon based, and the one I have dilutes with water. Is expensive though. The Renaissance to present day would use an iron gall ink, which I think is what you see by Vincent van Gogh in his quill drawing. When I say quill drawing, I don't mean the subject, it's the pen. He used a quill pen. And what happens is it could have initially been more rich, like almost black, but after years go by, it actually softens and becomes more of a light brown to dark brown. But one thing to also know is that you can get ink in pretty much any color you want. It's roughly $3 to $8 per jar, and you do go through them kind of quickly. So it is rather expensive choice, but some people just really, especially comic book artists, especially love this drawing medium. Okay, that is where we will stop. After I forgot this one, this is your example from your book, and again, very rich, dark black ink strokes, probably made from brush and maybe a little bit of pen.